toward that week in Jerusalem that will come to a Holy Week. And it was Jesus' intentional plan. He leaves Galilee. He heads for Jerusalem. He intently set his face to go there. And so in that little introduction, we see Jesus' sheer determination. He will obey God's will no matter the cost. He sets the example, even the example for us. And just like he set his face to go to Jerusalem, God calls us to set our sights on Christ and his kingdom, that upward call of God, and leave everything else behind for the sake of the gospel. And so he goes on the road to Jerusalem. And like I said, it's a 3-day walk, but it takes him 6 months. So here we are in chapter 9. If you speak and read, or you're familiar with the flow of Luke, you know it's chapter 19 before he gets to Jerusalem. So it's a 3-day journey, but it takes 6 months. See, the very drama of our salvation is set in motion with these very simple words. He intently set his face to go to Jerusalem. It leads me to wonder, what if he chose not to go to Jerusalem? What if he decided it was too much to give, too much to do, too much to bear? But he intently set his face to go to Jerusalem. What does he have to gain by getting to Jerusalem? Nothing. He has everything to lose. The people around him thought it was a suicide mission because they knew the opposition that was there. And anybody who reads the gospel knows that. And yet Jesus wouldn't be dissuaded. He believed it was God's will and God's destiny. See, this is perhaps the turning point of the whole story of the gospel. It's right there in the middle of the story when Jesus is fully aware of what's going to happen, fully aware of his destiny, but he sets his face to go to Jerusalem. Now, if we were making a movie about this time, there'd be kind of an everyday hubbub of people around Jesus, and all of a sudden we would focus in on him and we'd see him in this kind of gaze, and maybe the scene would then shift off to kind of a shimmering effect, and off in the distance you would see the sky of Jerusalem, and just outside of it you would see those crosses there on the mountain. And this is what Jesus is looking at. It's what he's facing as he gets ready to go to Jerusalem. But then there's some other things that happen. He set his face, he's so intent that it shows up in everything he does. Now, our English translations don't really capture the full force of this phrase. He set his face because it's repeated in verses 51, 52, and 53. And it's forceful in our English translation, but it doesn't capture the real force of it. So here's my kind of translation. As the time approached and we were taken up to heaven, Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. And he sent messengers before his face, because that's the literal translation, who went to a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because his face was set for Jerusalem. You see what Luke is showing us there? Jesus is so insistent that that's his death. Everybody figured it out. They knew. They understood his face was set to go to Jerusalem. Now, it takes a little while to get there. And so along the road, we move along the road with him. And as we move along the road, we'll see several different occasions where he interacts with people. And we'll see several people that he interacts with today in the rest of this chapter. Oh, but by the way, Luke didn't just write the gospel. He also wrote this early history of the church we call the Acts of the Apostles. And when you see that Jesus was on his way, he was following the road to Jerusalem, you might keep in mind that later in the gospel, in the book of Acts, Luke reminds us that the early followers of Jesus were the followers of the way. They were followers of the road. On the road to Jerusalem, he meets people. And we'll see 5 illustrations here today that as Jesus interacts with people. And in all these occasions where he interacts with these people, he's speaking about discipleship and the implications of following him. He's speaking to those who have the potential to be his followers. And as he often does, he speaks in kind of hyperbole, a kind of exaggerated expression to capture people's attention. So I hope as we look through these next verses that the kind of force that he uses with his words will be a force that speaks to us today and will help us understand just how's my life different because I'm on the road with Jesus. How's my life different because I'm a follower of Jesus? A few years ago, there was a popular little bumper sticker and a little wall plaque that he would use it. If you were on trial for a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? See, discipleship means living in ways that we might not otherwise live. And I ran across an illustration from Philip Schaeffer this week, who put it like this. A popular church metaphor is that of the people of God on pilgrimage. But a more apt metaphor should be that of the people of God as nomads. Pilgrims know where their journey is headed. Nomads are called to go by uncertain paths to a place that shall be made holy at some indefinite time by something God shall say or do. And there's no guide. No guide except a pillar of fire by night and a wind-driven cloud by day. Sounds and symbols of the Holy Spirit. See, the disciples didn't really understand that day as they were starting their journey to Jerusalem, that they could soon become nomads on the earth, traveling all over the world with no fixed homes, often living in frightening and hostile circumstances. They were following the Lord. But they and we are also pilgrims. Because pilgrims do have a final destination. Heaven, eternity with God. Now, Jesus is on the road. He has set his space. He is marching to meet his destiny, and he had explained it earlier to his disciples what his destiny was. The Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and the third day be raised up. And shortly after that, he sets his face to go to Jerusalem. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly why he was doing it. Luke didn't say that he set his face to go to Jerusalem because he ran out of things to do in Capernaum, or that the Galileans would listen to him anymore. No, the crowds were still following. Or he didn't say he set his face to go to Jerusalem because he had better opportunities there. No, it says the day of King passed, when the days were near, that he should be taken. He didn't set his face to go to Jerusalem. Not because it was convenient or compelling, but because he believed it was God's will for his life. So he allowed nothing to stand in the way. But he invited others to come on the journey with him. And as he invited them, there were some roadblocks and possible detours that developed. And so let's look at the remainder of today's passage from that perspective. What kept people from joining him on the journey? Let's look at some of the roadblocks on the road to Jerusalem. Look at verses 52 and 53. We read them earlier, but look back at the content again. He sent messengers on ahead who went to a Samaritan village to get things ready for him, but the people there did not welcome him because he was headed for Jerusalem. The first roadblock we encounter here is the roadblock of rejection. And that roadblock occurs whenever anyone rejects Jesus outright. And when they don't even begin walking the road of discipleship with him. See, Jesus sent this message ahead of him as official representatives. I think the actual text says they are angelos, angels, messengers. Official representatives to prepare the way for his arrival. And they went into a Samaritan village. Now, if you look at some of the other stories about Jesus traveling, they often sent people into villages to purchase provisions. Maybe they're there to secure lodging for the night. He goes into the village. Now, we all know that Jews and Samaritans don't get along. We still see part of the aftermath of the Palestinian-Israeli dilemma today. The Jews hated the Samaritans, the Samaritans hated the Jews. But the most direct route from Galilee to Jerusalem went right through Samaria. So it was more convenient to come straight through, even though it was hostile territory. But the people won't welcome Jesus. They offer no hospitality. They made it clear that Jesus and his disciples were not welcome. Why did they reject him? Because he's going to Jerusalem. They recognize him as a pilgrim. Rejection. It's a roadblock. Some people never even begin the roadway of discipleship because they reject Jesus outright. It's like they block the entrance ramp. They reject Jesus outright. I wonder, is that a roadblock for any of us? The Samaritans refused Jesus' hospitality in their village. Have you ever refused Jesus' hospitality in your heart? The Samaritans didn't receive Jesus. We talk a lot of Baptists who really believe in conversion. We talk about that time when we came to believe, when we received him. And the promise that John gives us in his gospel is that to all receive him, welcome him, those who believe in his name, he gives the right to become children of God. The Samaritans rejected Jesus without even understanding who he was. They didn't reject him because he said he was the Son of God, or because of his preaching or his message. That they rejected him simply because he was going to Jerusalem. But the same thing happens today. So many people reject Jesus today without even understanding who it is or what he did. How sad. So our responsibility as believers is to make sure that people do understand these things. That Jesus really is someone special, not just another religious leader. So people around us can make a decision for the truth rather than making a decision based on a false impression of what Christianity is all about. See, the first roadblock on the road to Jerusalem is the roadblock of rejection. And until you can overcome that one, you can't begin the path, the roadway of discipleship. There's another roadblock that shows up here, and you see it in verses 54 and 55 there, 56. This is the roadblock of attitude. Let's see what it says there. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them? Some manuscripts have little parentheses there, like how Elijah did. But Jesus turned to rebuke them, and they went to another village. The roadblock to discipleship here is attitude. So here we have good old James and John, sons of thunder. Almost sounds like a tag team group from a wrestling match. James and John are so indignant with the Samaritans because they rejected Jesus that they seek vengeance. And they remember the prophet Elijah who had called down fire from all the enemies of God, and they offered him the same thing for Jesus. I guess you have to admire their faith and their zeal. They have no doubt that they could actually do this. I mean, if you look earlier, you'll see that they've been given the authority over evil spirits. They've been empowered to heal and cast out demons. They've just seen Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration, and maybe that's when they got to thinking that we could be like Elijah. But what was Jesus' response? Luke tells us that Jesus turned around and rebuked them. Now, again, that English word is harsh, but if you look at his real attitude that Jesus expresses, it's even harsher. It's harsh. It's a serious rebuke. Because that's not Jesus' approach. See, there's no problem with their faith. They really believe. There's no problem with their zeal, their intent. The problem is their attitude. They completely misunderstood Jesus' mission. Jesus didn't want them to call that fire, because Jesus didn't come to destroy, but to save. See, earlier, Jesus had given instructions about when you're going out, and he didn't send James and John out. And the instruction was, if people don't welcome you, he didn't say call down fire. He said, shake the dust off your feet. Go on. Shake the dust off your feet. Go on. Maybe they'll listen to the next person that comes along. Don't call down fire on them. Later, the Apostle Paul describes to Timothy how it is that the Lord's servant should deal with these people who just don't listen. And here's what he says in 2 Timothy 2. The Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Those who oppose him, he must gently instruct, in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth. As tempting as it is to be like James and John and call down fire on those who disagree with us, that's not what we're called to. We're called to be kind and gentle, not resentful. Could not be accomplished by violence. For to bring in God's kingdom by violence is to betray the very character of the kingdom that he is. And it was true then, and it's true today. And this roadblock attitude has detoured many followers who are walking the highway of, immaturity. And it's left others who would walk the road confused, because this is the hypocrisy of those who say they follow Jesus, but don't exhibit his attitudes. Well, there's some other roadblocks that come along. The next incident here that comes along, they're walking along the road. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He found some place to stay. They went to another village. And while they're walking along the road, somebody comes up in verse 57. I will follow you wherever you go. Now, when we look at these last three illustrations, we don't know for sure if any of these three guys we're about to look at actually became followers. They seem similar to the rich young ruler that Matthew tells us about, that wants to follow Jesus and just can't quite do it. It'd be nice to know if they ended up following Jesus, but the focus on the passage is not so much on these would-be disciples' responses, but rather on Jesus' demands. So here we have this intense, I want to follow you. I will follow you wherever you go. And here we have the roadblock of hasty commitments. Because Jesus replies, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. No place to lay his head. And by the way, if you remember back in December, when we were singing Christmas songs, and we sang that little song, Away in a Manger, no crib for his bed, the little Lord Jesus laid down his sweet head. Well, it was a reference to that very passage, where on this occasion and others, Jesus says, I have no place. Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. What he's implying in the statement is that to follow Jesus means that you're going to experience life and death the same way he does. I want to follow you wherever you go. The man's commitment seems strong. He offers to follow Jesus wherever, but Jesus only offers nowhere. There's no hole, no nest, nowhere to lay his head. And his disciples can expect nothing better. So from the very beginning, Jesus emptied himself. He humbled himself at the beginning of his life. He was born in a stable, cradled in a manger. In the same manner, he will humble himself at the end of his life, dying on a cross. In between, he focuses on ministry rather than personal comfort. And he expects his disciples to do the very same thing. He blesses sacrificial ministry. The foxes have holes. The birds have nests. The Son of Man has no place. Well, it's a little surprising that Jesus responds to the man's willing discipleship with a statement like that. But apparently Jesus sees something in the man's heart. Perhaps the man thinks that Jesus is a young man on his way up and he wants to ride his coattails. Jesus, however, is on his way uphill to Jerusalem and is preparing to be lifted up on a cross. Hardly the upwardly mobile path that most young men want to follow. Now, the words to this young man are admirable. Matthew has a similar account, and he tells us that this man was a teacher of the law. And a teacher in those days would normally do discipleship as following a man's teachings. But this man offered not just to follow Jesus' teaching, he was willing to follow Jesus on foot. He was willing to join Jesus' company of traveling disciples. And he was willing to go wherever you go. That's a wonderful declaration of faith and commitment. It's one that should inspire all of us. Can you just picture the disciples and the crowd hearing this man and clapping their hands and nodding their heads and patting him on the back for such a decision? But Jesus saw the roadblock. The man saying all the right words, but he hadn't really counted the cost. And so Jesus challenged his commitment. Foxes have holes, birds have this, I've got no place. That's a different story. It's one thing to follow Jesus when the path is smooth and the burden is light, but what about when the going gets tough? Will we still follow? See, Jesus and his disciples had just come from a town and they've been turned away. What's Jesus doing here? He's helping men count the cost of discipleship. The servant's not greater than his master. The teacher of the law made a bold statement, but he didn't think through the implications of the statement. It reminds me a little bit about Peter, who says, Lord, if even everybody else deserts, I'll stand with you. And that very night, he denied him. So here's your question. Do you desire to follow Christ? Then count the cost. It's a lifelong commitment. And sometimes Christ calls us to suffering. It's a life of obedience. It's a life of commitment. It's a life filled with joy, but you have to count the cost. Don't let the roadblock of hasty commitment make you like the one who makes some emotional response and then never follows through to the life of discipleship. Well, there's another roadblock that surfaces here. He said to another man, now this one Jesus invites him. Follow me. Follow me like that Jesus invited us to follow him. But then replied, Lord, first let me go bury my father. Let me go bury my father. And then Jesus says, let the dead bury their own dead. But you go and proclaim the kingdom of God. The second would-be follower seems to have a legitimate excuse. But he's blocked by delay. And Jesus' response at first sounds cruel, until we realize that Jesus wasn't talking about funeral services, but divided loyalties. Let me fulfill my obligation to my Father, is what the man's really saying. And then after he's gone, I'll be free to follow you. No, we all know that's not good enough. In the language of the Old Testament, you shall have no other gods before me. Earlier, Jesus had put it like this, or later he'll put it like this: if anyone comes to me and doesn't disregard his own father, mother, wife, children, brothers, and sisters, yes, in his own life also, he can't be my disciple. I don't know about you, but I remember looking at that verse in Sunday school growing up. It makes us cringe when we realize what Jesus calls us to. A more positive spin was they put God's first and the others find their rightful place. But the roadblock the man throws up here is the roadblock of delay. And that's often one who will jump up quickly and eagerly respond. No, I will, but sometime in the future I will. You know, all my years of dealing with people, I've only run across one person who put aside out there in front of him a particular point in time that he would decide to follow Jesus. Only one person. Fortunately, he lived long enough to retire and have that schedule that he wanted to keep, and then he came to faith. Lord, first let me. Boy, started on the wrong foot. He started on the me foot rather than the Christ foot. He's willing to put Jesus' call to discipleship on hold. And we do this anytime we respond to God's good. Well, Lord, let me first. Or sometime later. Or if I have time, I will. So what's he want to do first? Well, he wants to go bury his father. Which really means he wants to go let his father live out his life. And then after his father has lived out his life at some indefinite point in the future, and then he'll follow Jesus. Jesus makes a call that has to take precedence, even over the most solemn obligations to family. And so regardless of whether the father is living or dead or near dead at the time, it's a radical call to the commitment. And the roadblock that the man throws up is the roadblock of delay that prevents that commitment. And then there's the roadblock of dividing loyalties. Still another said, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. Jesus said, no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Now, back in Elijah's time, when he invited Elisha to come along with him and accept his prophetic call, Elisha said, well, let me first go back and say goodbye. And Elijah allows him to do that. Jesus doesn't tolerate that. But by the time talking, if you look back to that story of Elijah and Elisha, when Elisha goes back, he's interrupted in his plowing. He's a farmer. And so when he goes back, he kills the oxen. He uses his farming tools as fuel for a fire. And he burns all of his bridges. He says goodbye, and it is goodbye. Now he follows Elisha. Jesus calls upon people to make such a radical commitment that they will put their hands to a plow and they'll keep on plowing. Keep on plowing. Now, plowing in those days meant that you had to poke the draft animal with one hand and hold the plow steady with the other. And if you look back or turn around, you're going to get a twist in your furrow and you're never going to recover from it. Everybody's going to see the mistake you made all the roads. If we put it more in terms of our parlance today, we would talk about don't look in the back seat while you're driving. Or more popularly these days, don't text and drive. Because you have divided attention. So Jesus is saying, don't look back. If you look back, you're just going to invite regret. You're going to foster nostalgia, and you're going to live in the past. Don't look back. You've got to look forward. You're being called to something else, and something new, and something different. And so it means we don't want to play the what-if game. Well, what if I done that? Or what if I hadn't done that? No, to look back is to hold on to a memory rather than claim a promise. It's to deny the possibility that what's out there in front of us is so, well, it's so much better and so overwhelming that it requires staying on task. Now, we can give all sorts of reasons as to why these divided loyalties spring up. But let me just tell you that some folks, and most of you, have figured out that you put your hand to the plow and you just keep doing what you can do. A few summers ago, as we hosted the annual summit, and that's part of my responsibility with the denomination was to organize that national convention. But we were over in Evansville, and one of the things we were struggling with, we knew we had a large group of young families coming, that would have a large group of preschoolers and early elementary that would need conscientious care. And at that point in time, we didn't quite have the volunteer force that we needed. And so we were getting organized, and we're getting people trained, getting people assigned, and we look around and we don't have nearly enough folks to staff what we need to staff. And as I'm walking down the hall to see if anybody else is on their way, down that big hall out there in the events plaza, the center that kind of circles the whole pavilion, there's this group of ladies that I ran into that are headed toward their assignments. We didn't know they were coming, but they were organized by Linda Cameron. She's the pastor's wife at the Howell Church over in Evansville. Linda's a retired elementary teacher, and she has a knee problem, so she walks with a cane. But she had a group of folks that were, she was one of the younger of the set. They were senior citizens, but they knew they couldn't teach classes, they couldn't run with the teenagers, but they knew they could take care of babies. And they did. They did what they could do. They stayed on task. You know, there's something reassuring when you made a commitment and you're plowing and you just keep plowing. Now, plowing's hard work. And we get tired, but we stay on task. Stay on task. That's what Jesus calls us to. Put your hand to the plow, do what you can, and keep doing it. By the way, Jesus has offered every one of us a personal invitation. A personal invitation. And it comes from Jesus himself. A personal invitation to follow. It's coming from Jesus. On another occasion, the risen Lord offers an invitation that's much like the one he offers today. John tells us about the Revelation where he stands at the door and he knocks. He knocks. Letting anyone who hears knock open the door so he can come in so we can work on it together. And here's a beautiful part of this story. We don't have the rest of the story. We don't have the final reaction of these men and others. And heaven will understand it, but from looking at the way God's working with people, there's more than one occasion where God has helped people move beyond excuses. Moses protested, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Later he says, "Lord, I haven't been eloquent, I'm not in the past or even now. I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue." Remember Gideon, who said to the angel, "How can I deliver these people? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family." And later he said, "I only got 300 guys. Jeremiah says when he hears the call of God, "Oh Lord, I don't know how to speak, I'm just a boy." Isaiah sees this vision of God and is called to discipleship, and woe is me. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among the people of unclean lips. And yet each of these people, and many others beside, however reluctantly, they simply did what God asked. And God blessed their reluctant discipleship. That's good news. I wonder if the men in our passage dropped their excuses and followed Jesus. What happened if they did? We dropped our excuses. A lot of us, like we've been sidetracked from following Jesus by the roadblocks and the detours that we placed on the route. We might say, "I'm not ready to commit to Christ quite yet. Maybe next year. Well, I've got more time. I want to follow you, Jesus, but first